Hey, I'm CARBO brother. I'm Chris Nelson, president of CARBO. Really excited to introduce a new 60% trigger pull reduction for your Thompson center compass bolt action rifle. You guys requested it. Now it's here. This is living proof that we're always listening to you guys, taking your suggestions and putting them into action. This is a fantastic trigger pull reduction for a fantastic firearm. It's unfortunate though, this is actually adjustable from the factory. Your owner's manual will tell you how to adjust the trigger pull, but it only goes so light, and you'll see here in a second when we test the factory trigger pull. We got some outstanding results with this spring kit, a 60% trigger pull reduction. Fantastic. This trigger is amazing now with this spring kit. Let's jump on over the tabletop, put this baby in. Parts and tools needed for this build: Thompson center compass trigger spring kit by M CARBO, 1/16 inch punch, hammer, 5/32 inch Allen key, 2mm flathead screwdriver, blue 242 Loctite, synthetic grease with PTFE, block of wood with the hole in it, and as always guys, make sure you're wearing eye pro. Before we get started, let's go ahead and check our firearms together, make sure they're clear. Remove the magazine, check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. Let's go ahead and see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 4 pounds, 6.7 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 4 pounds, 10.6 ounces. Now we begin the disassembly by opening the bolt all the way to the rear. Press on the bolt release, slide the bolt right out, set that aside. Now go ahead and orient your rifles like so. Magazine well facing up. We're gonna remove the front and rear takedown screws. Use your 5/32 inch Allen key. Go ahead and do that now. Once the screws are loose, either remove them or go ahead and just lift up on the stock. And they'll stay right in like that. Go ahead and drop them out. Set your stock aside. You can see the front and rear takedown screws are universal. They're the same, so no worries if you get them mixed up. Set those aside. Now let's go ahead and focus in on the trigger assembly in your Thompson center compass. Now here's a quick lay of the land here with the trigger assembly. Here's your Sear and your Sear Spring, your trigger, your main trigger return spring, and your secondary trigger return spring. Now, this trigger is adjustable, and you can see here we're on the lowest setting. So with these adjustable nuts here, if they're all the way flush at the bottom of the trigger like they are here, this is as light a trigger pull as you're gonna get with the factory configuration. So you can see what we were averaging in the beginning there is pretty heavy, and we're as light as we can go. Now, if for whatever reason you wanted a heavier trigger, you could always adjust these little nuts here upward, creating more tension on that main trigger return spring. Now down here is your Overtravel adjustment, and that's what we need that little tiny flathead screwdriver for. We're gonna get into all that here in a second, but what I also wanted to cover was, now Thompson Center did a voluntary recall on all rifles made before 2016. So if you've got a Thompson Center compass that was produced after 2016, it's got this new counterweight here. Now what their idea was to use an additional spring and counterweight to put more tension on the trigger. That way there it would make it a little safer. So the problem they were having is this trigger wouldn't pass a 6-inch drop test on hard concrete. So when you had the bolt locked and the weapon on fire, if you dropped it from 6 inches onto concrete, it would go off. The firing pin would release. So in an effort to make their firearms safer, they voluntarily recalled this. And I actually called Thompson Center to get a name for this counterweight, but counterweight is the best they could give me. So it's a counterweight. You've got your secondary trigger return spring, which is new, and you've got your main trigger return spring here, and obviously the Sear Spring like we discussed. Now if you go ahead and look at page 25 on your owner's manual, you'll notice this is a picture of the old trigger assembly. So if you've got something made before 2016, this is likely what you're looking at here. You're not going to have that counterweight down at the bottom, nor that counterweight spring. So if you have a Thompson Center compass that was made before 2016, you might as well go ahead and get the new hardware. This is a 3-spring kit, and it's a combined trigger pull reduction, so you will need this other piece of hardware to get the full effect. So we'll get started with the disassembly by removing this trigger hinge pin here first, and then we'll go ahead and remove the Sear hinge pin second. So let's go ahead and take our 1/16 inch punch and our hammer, tap out that trigger hinge pin. All right. We'll go ahead and slowly pull everything apart. So you can see how that's put together there. You can see we're at our lowest factory trigger pull adjustment here with both of these adjustment nuts flush to the trigger like so. So here's your main trigger return spring here. Go ahead and remove that. Your secondary trigger return spring here. Go ahead and remove that. Set the trigger and springs aside. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the Sear hinge pin here. Just take notice that the counterweight's actually attached on the back side here. This is where it links up. So we'll go ahead and tap that out now. All All right, slowly removing our punch so we can see everything as it comes apart. So remove the counterweight, set that aside. We'll go ahead and pull out the sear, set that aside, and then the sear spring, remove that as well, set that aside. Now we'll go ahead and start the assembly. All right, so here's a quick layout of the factory components as we just disassembled them. You know, you've got your sear and trigger hinge pin here. They're universal, so you don't have to worry about keeping them separated. You've got your sear here, you've got your counterweight here, your trigger here, and here's your 3 springs. So you've got color-coded springs from the factory. This is your main trigger return spring here. This little one is your secondary trigger return spring, and this non-painted spring is your sear spring. Let's go ahead and open up our Thompson Center Compass Trigger Spring Kit by M CARBO, and we'll compare these springs now. Alright, so one thing you'll notice right away with the M CARBO spring kit, none of these springs are painted. So this requires some attention to detail here. Now, it's not that complicated. It's pretty easy to see once you get them all together. You've got a tiny little spring here on the right. That's your secondary trigger return spring. And you've got this long spring here in the middle. That's your main trigger return spring. We've made it so that you won't need any of those trigger adjustment nuts. It'll fit just fine like it is there. You can add trigger adjustment nuts if you want to increase the trigger pull, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And you've got your sear spring, this shorter one here. So you've got 2 springs that look similar, kind of like the factory setup, except the main trigger return spring is the longest one, and the shorter one is the sear spring. Let's go ahead and do a quick side-by-side with the factory springs. Alright, so you can see I've got the M CARBO springs up top here, and then I've got the factory springs down here. So you can see the factory, their main trigger return spring right here painted in green, right? It's really stiff and thick, and then you've got the M CARBO main trigger return spring here, much more relaxed spring, smaller diameter wire. Same with the sear spring. Here's the factory sear spring, here's the M CARBO sear spring, and then the secondary trigger return spring. This is the factory one here, and this is the M CARBO spring. So let's go ahead, set these factory springs aside. We'll go ahead and put in the M CARBO trigger spring kit. All right, so now we're going to begin the reassembly of our compass rifles. Just take notice the sear here, how it engages with the trigger. You can see that sear and trigger engagement surface there. You can see how the sear, it slopes down to a point here. So we want to actually install the sear like so. You can even see a little bit of a wear mark on the top of the sear there where the sear spring was. So we'll go ahead and insert the sear just like this. Now we begin the reassembly by installing the sear and the counterweight. Remember, they go on the same hinge pin. Now we're going to go ahead and install the M CARBO sear spring. Just remember, the sear spring is the shorter of the 2 larger diameter springs. So it's this one right here. This longer one is the trigger return spring. This little shorter one is the M CARBO sear spring. So we'll go ahead and install the shorter spring, which is the sear spring. Keep in mind, the sear and the counterweight operate off of the same sear hinge pin. So we'll also have to install this counterweight at the same time. All right, now go ahead and orient your receiver like so. You can see here's the end of the receiver right here. Here's your bolt release button right here, and the tip of the barrel is this direction. So we're going to focus on this hole here. This is where the sear spring goes. We're going to take that shorter spring, right, shorter in length. We're going to drop that right in. Now we're going to take our sear, and we're going to match up this wear pattern with the sear spring. We're going to go ahead and flip it up like that. This little narrow portion facing the end of the receiver, right? We're going to go ahead and line it up like that. Next, we're going to take that counterweight and we're going to position that on this side here, on the bolt release button side, right? We're going to line it all up and we're going to put in our sear hinge pin. Remember, the hinge pins are universal, so we're going to go ahead and get it started. And then we're going to go ahead and line them up. Then once you got them all lined up, it helps if you just rotate over on top of that pin. Use the weight of the receiver to help push it all the way through, pushing on your block of wood. And it also helps because you can look down and make sure you're lined up. As you're pushing down, you're using the weight of the receiver to push down that block of wood, make sure your holes are lined up. You can also use your hammer, give it a little tap. If you got a little plastic tip, it helps so you don't scratch up the receiver. All right, we're almost all the way through there now. We'll take our punch. Just give it a little bit more. And that might be it. All right, good. We're nice and even on both sides. We've got our counterweight in here. We've got our sear in here. It's functional. Excellent. Now we need to go ahead and put the trigger in. All right, now we're about halfway there. We've got our sear installed, our sear spring installed, and we've got the counterweight installed. Now we need to go ahead and install the trigger. So the main trigger return spring is going to go up here on top of the overtravel screw. The secondary trigger return spring is going to go ahead and insert into this milled pocket here on the actual trigger itself. Now before we go any further, let's go ahead and remove these adjustment nuts. We will not need these any longer. The only reason you will need these is if you want to make your trigger pull a little heavier. And we're also going to remove this bottom one here because it won't work without the counter nut above it. But we will need to put some blue Loctite on these threads. This is our Overtravel adjustment screw. Now go ahead and back off your Overtravel screw like so. We're going to wait and install the blue 242 Loctite here in a minute once we're adjusting the Overtravel. So we'll go ahead and position it like this. Now let's go ahead and proceed with the installation. I also want to point out, if you put some of the Super Lube synthetic grease with PTFE, PTFE is Teflon. Really good stuff. We put it on a lot of our applications. Put it on the actual trigger and sear engagement surface on the trigger and sear. It'll help smoothen up some of that grittiness in the trigger. Then we'll take a little bit and put it in that milled pocket down there so it'll hold our secondary trigger return spring in place. Go ahead and insert that now. All right. Now we'll go ahead and take our main trigger return spring and position that over top of the Overtravel screw like so. Now we'll go ahead and get our trigger situated on the counterweight first, compress that secondary spring. Now we'll go ahead and line up the holes on the trigger with the receiver and the main trigger return spring with the pocket here in the receiver. And we'll go ahead and we'll take our trigger hinge pin, place it underneath in the hole. Take our block of wood, use the weight of the receiver to help push it in. All right, sliding in. Now we're going to go ahead and take our hammer, give it a little tap, even it up, then take your punch if you need to, give it another tap, make sure it's good and even on both sides. All right, good to go. Now we just need to go ahead and adjust this Overtravel screw. Now let's go ahead and adjust the Overtravel. What we're going to need to do is insert the bolt. So go ahead and line up the notch there on the bolt with the bolt release button. Slide the bolt right in, lock it in place. Now take your blue 242 Loctite and put a good little amount on that bottom thread there. All right, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to tighten up the Overtravel screw. And in doing so, we're going to get that blue 242 Loctite up in those threads inside that trigger. Now it's all the way tight right now. All right, so we're going to wipe off the excess because we don't need to make a mess. Now we got our thread locker up inside the actual trigger. We're going to go ahead and back off our Overtravel adjustment screw incrementally and test it along the way until we can get the actual firing pin to release. All right, so it almost went. I'm going to make a minor adjustment and it'll go off. There we go. So I loosened it up just a little bit more and it went right off. So we're good right there. And that's ideal. If you can get it to go halfway like it did just a second ago there. Now let's test it one more time, make sure we're good. Perfect. All right, we're at the perfect adjustment for Overtravel. We've got a great, ooh, that feels good already. All right, let's go ahead and get this baby in and then do some trigger pull readings. That feels nice. Nice and smooth too. That grease really helps take that grittiness out of the trigger. I mean, you can imagine it reduces that friction between those two metal components. And I really like the fact that we don't need these adjustment nuts anymore. It's much cleaner. The Loctite's gonna do a great job holding that Overtravel screw in place. Let's go ahead and put this baby in. I'm excited to see what our trigger pull is. Now that our trigger assembly is all back together, it's just a matter of dropping our receiver and barrel group back into the stock. Just make sure you line up the recoil lug slot on the receiver with the recoil lug on the actual stock itself. Go ahead and drop it into place now. You can feel that recoil lug just snap right in. Now we'll take our two takedown screws. Remember, these are universal, so we'll drop one in the front and one in the rear. And then go ahead and take your 5/32 inch Allen key and tighten them right up. And snug them up. All right, good to go. Now that we got our rifles back together, let's go ahead and do a quick function check, make sure everything functions properly. Go ahead and place it on safe, pull the trigger, nothing, good. Place it on fire, pull the trigger. Oh man, that is nice. Let's go ahead and test this trigger pull. All right, let's see what kind of trigger pull reduction we got. Woo, 1 pound, 4.4 ounces. Dang. All right, let's take one more to confirm. Wow. 1 pound, 3.9 ounces. That is one heck of a trigger pull reduction. I mean, that feels amazing. Man, that is nice. Oh, yeah. Well, there you have it, guys. From 4.5 pounds down to 1.5 pounds, a fantastic trigger pull reduction for your Thompson center compass rifle. I really like this trigger the way it is now. I can't believe how heavy it was before. Man, that feels amazing. 1.5 pound trigger pull. Now, that might be too light for some folks. If it is, you can just grab a couple of those stock nuts that come with the trigger assembly and put them back on that Overtravel screw. That'll increase the tension on the main trigger return spring in the M CARBO spring kit. That'll increase the trigger pull weight, obviously, but it will give you still a nice smooth trigger pull. Maybe not as light and crisp, but it will give you a nice clean trigger pull, a little bit lighter than factory. Everybody's gonna get different results. Man, this feels really good. I am really impressed with it. Looking forward to your feedback. Thank you, M CARBO brother, for your ideas and your support, and as always, happy shooting.